I will call this February 20th meeting of the Underhill Planning Commission to order. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? No. Okay. Any public comment? In this instance, Penny, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No comment except the key in the lockbox is missing.
Okay. Well, should we publicize that we are looking for a lockbox thief? Okay, that takes us to the follow-up to the January 16th presentation. What were you, did you want to kick that one off?
Sure.
Larry? Yeah.
Right, so thinking about this, of course, you all have seen the slide deck, and I have some more copies in my desk drawer, which I can take out if anybody wants their own copy. I was supposed to hand them out the night of the presentation, but forgot. Sorry about that, but I have them. So the thought was that we could just, since we haven't really talked about it since the presentation by Jens Hoka, that we might just sort of do a round robin among the members to, what are you thinking about this process? And I also just sent out to all the members some resources that were just shared with me today from Darren Shibler, who's my go-to at regional planning, because I asked him, so what tools have other towns used to provide protections other than just completely banning all forms of development in areas of town that they wish to preserve and protect in terms of natural resource values? And he sent me a whole bunch of things, which I haven't really had time to dig into, but I saved and shared those documents with you by email. It seems like there's a variety of methods that are available, and we can talk about this as we dig further into it about which ones might be most appropriate for Underhill. Recognizing that we're starting from a base of what's in the land use regs already that spell out protections for specific types of resources, such as wetlands and high elevation areas and so forth. So, yeah.
Should we start with you, Boris?
Well, I missed that meeting, so I could make up something.
That was the one online, right?
The one
I would.
before.
That's when we were on town hall, like upstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
I missed
Right, okay.
it and watched the recording.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So,
Do you want to start then, Ray? Like, what were your thoughts on it?
I guess
Or
the
question?
one thing that I was curious about was, which I think I asked a question about it, was the forest fragmentation and how other towns were implementing that.
Yeah.
And, and how do we even begin to do that, I guess, was the one thing that I was curious about, because it's, and I guess I was talking to somebody about that, and Justin Willis is on the DRB in Jericho, and he said they just recently updated their bylaws to include some places where they wanted to preserve.
So did they do development there, or what did they do?
Like if you wanted to develop a certain part of a plot, you had to leave a space, leave some of the lot open for, wildlife corridors if it was determined that was a sensitive area.
So instead of like pushing it up the driveway up the middle, maybe they go to like one side or the other.
And I'm curious about how do we even begin to implement that sort of bylaw. That seems like it's such a random thing, and people don't like it when you tell them they can't do something with their property. So I think we might, instantly run up against a brick wall, maybe with that. But I don't know. What's everybody else's thought about that? I mean, you're fairly well versed on it, Sandy.
Well, like Larry said, other towns have done stuff, and I'm a great one for seeing what they've done and see how that might work here. I think a lot of what we have done for the natural resource inventory and mapping, if we can agree on some of the protections through that, we'll be advancing a long ways towards reducing fragmentation, because a lot of the fragmentation is into those really large forest blocks. That's where we really want to prevent, once you get a road in there, then it just really disrupts the whole area.
Right.
So I have faith that going forward with the process we have outlined, we'll come up with some pretty good solutions to that. And then writing that in the bylaws, that's where I think capturing language that other people have used, that's where it really is going to be tricky to say it in just the right way.
Right.
Like you said.
But it's up to us to look at the natural resources inventory maps and then determine where we want to restrict development because of where we think there's
certain things.
Yeah, so that seems like a formidable process.
Well, I think if we went sort of page by page in this document that Jens put forward, you'll see that a lot of the first tier items really protect a lot if you were to implement them.
Okay.
For example, if you went to
like the wetlands map, because obviously you're not going to develop any wetland or housing. There's some on both sides of the road or
wetlands, the natural communities that are unusual, the forested riparian areas. No, this isn't really. I think the tier 2 are the ones where you really protect more than what we have already, because you're looking at all the forest blocks, the core forests. Yeah, I think I really like what Arrowwood did in their forest block assessment, because they really outline those really large areas that are core forest, where if you penetrate those, you really do a lot of harm. And maybe that's an area we could look at more for how do we protect that. The regional map that Darren showed us, I think if we were to overlay that, what he was saying is there's a huge area that where they're already in current use, which means that they won't be developing that. So if there's a way to overlap what he already has with these maps we have, I think you'll see that, a lot of those really large forest blocks should be protected as long as people stay in those programs.
I had a thought on that relationship, and maybe I'm being overly simplistic about it, but it feels like we should move ahead with all the work you all have done and just figure out what we want to do. And this probably is bad phraseology, but ignore what the state's going to do. And then when they come in, we can compare them, but like sitting around for 18 months while they generate some map seems silly to me, to be honest. Like it's up to Underhill what we want Underhill to look like, right? If the state comes in with other rules, that's fine. But like, I don't think we should just sit around and wait for the state to do stuff.
It sounded like from the Regional Planning Commission, you seem like you was kind of pretty top down as far as, so you guys have a plan, that's fine, but we're making the plan, and
right.
We might look at yours, but our plan
right.
should be the plan.
Yeah, like I don't need your map. And it's like, Too bad, bud, we're doing a map. I don't know, that's my,
Those would be ignored in the
Yeah.
overall regional plan.
yeah,
A little bit counterproductive.
yeah.
Well, I feel like the regional plan is like just a giant fishing net. They're just trying to catch what they can. Like, I don't, this is dramatically different in, relief and forest versus even just Jericho or Essex. Like, you can't compare Essex to Underhill or, Fairfax to Burlington or whatever. It just seems kind of ridiculous to expect a larger entity to just be like, oh yeah, this is blanketed for the whole state,
I know we're getting off topic here, but we're talking about the presentation.
Yes.
To me, that was, most of that does not apply to
Right.
anything going on.
Well, they
What
basically
could
said,
possibly go on.
they
in this
basically
town.
said that.
What's that?
I think they basically said that, like, most of this doesn't apply to under.
Yeah, when they started talking about things, it's like, well, this is just for the general knowledge of what's going to happen in Essex or
Right.
Williston or whatever. It's like never going to happen here, so it was just, but it was good to hear anyway.
I feel like we're gonna get a number in March. I don't know, Larry can tell me I'm crazy, but I feel like Winooski's or whoever's gonna get a number in March of like 500 houses or something, and we're gonna number it with like 2.
Yeah, right.
It will be more than two.
And do ADUs count in that?
I don't know, do ADUs count?
we brought it up and he said like, yes, I guess, around, I can't
Yeah.
remember.
It's true.
Mhm. What's funny about that is the ADU may or may not be actual long-term housing, and the odds are in some towns it's not gonna be, right?
Right,
If you're
Yeah.
close to Smugs, it's probably gonna be short-term housing.
Right.
yeah.
It could be a VRBO thing or something,
Yeah.
or just an in-law suite.
Yeah.
Did you have thoughts on the, not on the CCRPC thing, but on the?
I think, going on what Sandy said, I think you also have the 1,500-foot buffer, but then if you trickle down from that, there's still a lot of land that's undevelopable below 1,500 feet, just by
Yeah.
steep slopes and
Yeah.
access for roads, for pitched driveways and that sort of thing. If you looked at that critically, it probably would greatly expand that above 1,500-foot buffer.
Yep.
But and he did mention the maybe increasing the stream buffers and the vernal pool buffers. That's something to think about. Yeah, to mention that.
Did you have thoughts, Bart?
Well, maybe it's just me, but I have a hard time, this is the first time I've seen this, and this is great. But what I would like to see is a lot of these areas put together on one big town map.
Mm-hmm.
So you could take a look at it and pick the places that maybe we want to develop and
Mhm.
other places that we don't, we want to protect.
Mm-hmm.
Like overlaid on like an aerial, so you can actually see how it interacts with like existing houses and open space, you mean, kind of thing?
That's very.
Yeah, what you just said just
Yeah.
it made me think, you know how you can put down overlays, one right after another on a map, so that you could do different layers or put them all down. But
I wonder if that's a meeting, because Sandy was just saying the interactive map on their website, which I admit I have not come to do that, has what you're talking about.
The one that the guy was doing 2 weeks ago?
Arrowwood, no.
No,
Arrowwood. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was trying to find that one while he was doing the presentation. I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
It must be
Arrowwood,
active.
did I say Arrowwood? Yeah. So maybe that's something we could take some time to do in a meeting together.
Like do it on here.
Yeah, do it on the big screen. Yep. I think that'd be
Yeah,
interesting.
this is sort of what you're talking about, Bart, where you have it all, but it has to be big enough so you can actually
Well,
tell where you are.
yeah,
It'd kind of be nice to see like, for me, the parcels too, because,
Mhm.
I mean, there's people out here that have 2, 3, 4, 500 acres, right? Like, what is that? That's, some of those are probably never gonna be split into anything, so like,
Mm. Never say never.
Yeah, never say
Yeah.
never.
I'm not saying they are, I'm just saying like, I know a lot of people that are really holding, at least up where I live, like nobody's
Yeah.
gonna give up their land for,
Yeah, right.
but it'd just be nice to see like how that all, see what you're really working with, right? Like if there's 10 lots here, and 4 of them are vacant, like, okay, cool, but if there's like a 500 acre parcel here, you know,
Mhm.
what's the odds of that being?
What we have here in Vermont a lot is somebody wealthy, usually from out of state, comes in, buys a big piece of land, and they only want to build one home on it, and they say, the rest of this land, I don't need. Then they want to sell it
Mhm.
or develop it or whatever.
One of my main concerns and why I think we should prioritize this is, like Tim mentioned steep slopes. I know this wasn't where he was going with it, but I just think as I watch what's happening with Underhill real estate, everyone always says like, well, that will never happen, whatever that is. And it's like,
It does.
if houses are $2 million,
Yeah.
someone's going to put in a $500,000 driveway and they're going to go and follow the rule. And it's just, is that what the town wants? I mean, I have my personal view on it, which I'm sure you can tell by my tone, but like, it's not what matters. It's like, what does the town want, right? Because real estate's just getting ludicrous, and it seems like it's just going to keep getting higher and higher. So I think like now is the time as a town to decide what we want Underhill to look like, and seems to be the primary driver behind that. So.
Just a couple notes. One is that Bart mentioned wanting to get the big picture with a map of the whole town and see how the resources overlay on it. And that resource is available online. There's a couple, actually several different resources. So Underhill has a map viewer that I've bookmarked on the browser on my computer over there. Not on this one because this one's not connected to the town server or to my bookmark, so I can't bring it up. I can't find it quickly. But I could show you because on the Underhill map viewer, there are map layers that you can click on and off that will illustrate various features. And then there's also the Agency of Natural Resources has a natural resource map viewer that allows you to turn on and off a whole bunch of natural resource data. So it incorporates a lot of the layers from that Jens presented in his slide deck here. Not everything, because of course the data that was gathered through the Arrowwood study is not showing up on the state maps. But things like rare, threatened, and endangered species is a layer. A&R map viewer. Upland communities is kind of there. Forest blocks are there. Wetlands are there. And so these are all things that you can, once you have that particular map viewer up, the A&R map viewer, you can literally just go through and click the layers you want to see. And you need a powerful late model computer for it to display quickly, because some of these data sets are huge in size and they take a while to load, but they're there to be looked at. And I think just looking at the slide deck here, I mean, the nice summary is on the last slide of the handout here. And I think it's good because in part because it shows, potentially how much of the town is sort of up for consideration, shall we say, for deeper protections than we have, because it shows a lot of the key layers in color on the map. And then there's that table to the right that shows the primary conservation considerations that have been recommended through the study, and then secondary conservation areas. And the other thing I wanted to share is just that our land use regs already have protections. I think Tim's starting to get at that. So, we have absolute prohibitions on steep slopes. We have prohibitions on development above 1,500 feet.
1,500.
Yeah. And we have stream bank protections and buffers for wetlands. So part of what we're talking about here is kind of a matter of degree, not of type. Thank you. So, for example, if there's, and I haven't studied the regulations in this detail myself, but if there's already a 50-foot required buffer around a state recognized wetland, then, we are certainly free to make that 100-foot buffer or whatever we decide is needed. And that is a fairly simple change in our land use regs. But there are some other techniques. And one of the things that I sent to you just this evening, so you will not have read it yet, but Darren Shibler referred me to the town of Underhill, which I think you mentioned. Jericho, sorry, the town of Jericho's recent change to their zoning, which specifically is to create a natural resource overlay district. So this is essentially a tool that is popular, is used in Vermont, recognized under statute, that allows towns to say whatever the underlying zoning rules are for a district, it doesn't matter whether it's a village district or rural or a conservation district, where there are certain parts of town that we're going to say are areas that have additional restrictions. And it may be something as simple as saying, well, if someone wants to do multifamily housing, just to choose one example, in a district, and it is close to an identified protected natural resource, they might have to go through conditional use review with the DRB instead of just getting a permit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a common tool that's used in the zoning overlay district model to provide additional protections without changing the underlying zoning completely.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, I will say also, if you look at the second chapter of our land use regs as it stands now in the dimensional standards tables that describe the rules for each of the zoning districts that we already have, there are a lot of uses that are called out for conditional use. And when the DRB, and Penny, please correct me if I'm speaking out of class here, but when the DRB is presented with an application for site plan review or for conditional use under those standards, I think that it's a pretty typical thing for the zoning administrator preparing that, working with the applicant to prepare that agenda item, that project for review by the DRB. It's a pretty typical thing for the zoning administrator to pull up and look at what are the natural resources that may be impacted by a project, and to make that part of the staff report. Does he do that, Penny?
Yes, when we have a zoning administrator.
Yeah.
That is what happens, and when we don't, then it doesn't happen.
Okay. Yeah.
If I could add, may I add one more thing to
Why
the
not?
Jericho comment, Larry?
Yeah.
Is that in talking with one of the persons who's on both the Planning Commission in Jericho and the Conservation Commission, Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong on this. My understanding is Jericho has this overlay district that indicates more sensitive areas that has to have conditional use. And what that kicks off for that particular project is it goes to the Conservation Commission to review. The Conservation Commission reviews it and gives their recommendations. Then it goes back to the DRB. But an interesting thing that was said by this member is that over the 3 years that it has happened, she does not really know whether the DRB has taken their recommendations or not. And that would be something curious to follow up on. It doesn't require them to take their recommendations. It just kicks off the Conservation Commission looking at it. That was my understanding. Yeah, I think that is what she said. I was just going to note that although there are data layers in the state archives, if we don't have ours available, for example, the wetlands that Arrowwood mapped are really quite different than what the state has on their system. They're better.
Yes.
That's why we hired them, right? And I wonder if there's a way that our data can be made available so that that is an option. You know what I mean?
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, there's details to it, but CCRPC is kind of between mapping specialists right now. So the woman who did the mapping work for CCRPC, which included adding in additional data layers to specific town map viewer sets, retired in November, I think, October or November. And there's like a substitute person who does know GIS, but she doesn't have the same sort of mastery of those skills. But Arrowwood, I'm sure, if they haven't already done so, can provide the shape files that would allow those layers to be added to our map viewer. And it's simply a matter of essentially importing them so that when someone opens our map viewer, which is a link I can share with you all, they can have access to those. It'll just be like an additional box on the left-hand menu that you can click on. Jeff is nodding. It sounds like you've had experience.
I mean, I do know that that's what I do for work. I stare at GIS.
Yeah.
Clicking layers on and off, yeah. I did, when we moved here, when we were looking for property, I found, I don't know, half a dozen different maps, same thing, what you're talking about. You have little colors for the steep slopes, riparian areas, wetlands, whatevers, and just to kind of use as a guide to what we were looking for property.
So are you saying you know how to import shape
No,
files?
I'm
and
saying I
maps?
know how to look at them, I know how to toggle them on and off and look at them.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's super helpful in Charlotte and in Bolton, my work there. We were able to bring up a very detailed map on the screen during meetings when projects were being reviewed, and you could turn on and off the layers at will, and you could zoom right into the parcel level. So, even somebody with a 1 acre parcel in the village, you could zoom right in, and then everybody could see on the big screen, whereas what's proximity to the wetlands? Is there a wildlife corridor? Is there a spot where there's a rare and endangered species that we have to watch out for? We don't want to impinge upon their territory. And so I'm very familiar with how to use it if it's there, but my GIS skills are minimal, and so I wouldn't know how to import that data if it wasn't already in the map viewer. But the ANR map viewer is one resource that's publicly available through the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources site. If you search on their site, you can find it and open it, and it's, you don't need a license to look at it or whatever, and you'll see, there's a layers icon on the upper left corner, and you can click on that layer icon, and it'll open up a menu of different layers that you can turn on and off. And you'll have to zoom in on Underhill manually, and then within Underhill, you can zoom into a particular area of town that you want to look at. So for example, if you wanted to zoom in on the area around the school, it would be pretty easy for all of you to find that. And then you could look and see what's nearby that is protected already. And as it was mentioned earlier, one of the layers in the map viewer is conserved land. So you can look and see which lands are in the current use program for forest or agriculture. And those are color coded, so it's pretty easy to see them once you click on the layer on.
But this is the public data on the parcel
Right.
viewer
Yes.
website, whereas the Arrowwood data,
Right, so
they have a
Arrowwood
similar
also
thing you could
has
use
a
on their
site.
website?
They also have a site where they developed it just for Underhill, and it really includes these layers.
And the government layers, or no, just their layers?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't have one of these sites that gives us everything we want, right?
Got it. Understood.
But that would be a real goal.
But your view is the Arrowwood site would be more helpful because it's better
It
data?
depends what
Or no, is that?
question you're asking,
Right.
is it about parcels and what's there? Well, right now you could go to the state site and you could see a lot of,
Yeah.
similar kind of information, but it's
Mhm.
not quite adjusted with a certain amount of accuracy. The other thing I wanted to say was, you've talked a lot about map viewers and whatnot, but I get the feeling that people aren't really used to looking at them, or, I think we should have a session where we just look at maps.
I was gonna suggest that actually for our next, and I for one, I know how to use the parcel viewer, I know how to go find my house. But when you asked me to click on, I don't know about you guys, you asked me to click on the layers, I get confused and I'm not always sure I have the right one, and I don't know I was trying to figure out where that one was by my house, and I
Sometimes
think
they
I
won't.
kept screwing it up.
Sometimes they won't toggle. You can toggle, but you won't see it. You just have to zoom. There's certain issues where, if you're zoomed in too far, or close, it won't see it. So you have to zoom out, and then it'll pop up.
So maybe we
Sometimes
could
you're
do
too far
that.
out, and it just takes way too long for your computer to load.
Yeah,
The
It's too
14
much
square
data.
miles of view that you have on your monitor, right? So there's just a fine.
I wonder if that could be a thing in a meeting, though, to your point. We could look at a map and go through a bit of it together between you and Jeff.
Yeah,
Sounds like,
that'd be
and obviously Larry as well. But
Me too. So
And if I may add my 2 cents too, I always wished that the zoning administrator had made a list of the layers that you should be looking at, because that would be so helpful when another zoning administrator comes in, or when people on the DRB, when we don't have a zoning administrator, you have the names of the layers. So I think that'd be really helpful while you're going through this process, Larry. If you keep track of those and share those with us, that would be great.
you're saying these are the 10 layers that
Like
you need to know how to use.
hybrid soils
Yeah.
and,
Okay.
be able to look at all of those, because there are innumerable layers, it's very confusing.
Are you guys all like really conversant with this stuff?
No.
Okay. Sorry, Tim, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just wondering if there's any, you were talking about precedent of other towns already engaging the discussion and with presumably some success out there in the implementation that's been done.
Mhm.
And just curious as far as how that could, what that looks like. And it seems like the obvious thing is how you negotiate or diplomatically approach this with different landowner interests and ideas of private ownership and what you're asking me to do with my land or changing my rights with the land that I have.
Yes.
And it seems like that could be a big obstacle before you present something, try to head off what sort of blowback or pushback you might get to try to engage people productively as opposed to adversarially.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, the documents that I sent you that describe how other towns have done it, talk about starting with the municipal plan as a policy document, because I think the plan has to first lay out that this is a priority for the town to preserve XYZ resource, whether it's wetlands or vernal pools or wildlife habitat. And I'm pretty sure that Underhill's plan does that already, at least in broad terms.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from there, you have to think about what is the right level of regulation to propose, recognizing that whatever you do, whatever new restrictions you create on development, you're going to piss some people off potentially, because as we pointed out at the beginning, you have people who historically believed held on to property for years, maybe generations in their family, who believe that someday they might subdivide their parcel for an adult family member to build a house, or that they might sell it to fund their retirement. And then all of a sudden the town is telling them, oh, well, sorry, we've decided you can't develop that because you have a couple of vernal pools in the middle of where you want to put a house. It's like, ooh, not good. So that's part of the process of researching changes in the template of land use regs. If you're going to change the zoning, if you're going to create an overlay district or make some areas off limits because of proximity to important natural resources, you really should look at who would be affected by it as part of the process of bringing that draft to the planning commission for consideration, so that when you have a public hearing with the proposed change, you don't have all of town hall filled with people with pitchforks and torches. Yeah.
When we were working on this natural resources inventory, and we had to contact individual landowners to ask if Arrowwood could walk their land because they had identified it as a possibly rich resource of natural resources. A homeowner said to me that she didn't realize that the zoning regulations that we had just implemented a few years before would affect her. And even though there were the public, comment periods and there was the front porch forum postings, and she said it would be so helpful, and I don't know that this really could ever be done, is that landowners who are affected by zoning regulation changes be informed of them, be sent a letter to say how their land would be affected.
I think that's a good idea. I'm going to wear my lawyer hat for a second, and we'd have to ask a real lawyer, the town lawyer. It feels like there's risk there. The risk being if you miss one, like you seem to have a problem. I think that's the risk.
That's an ideal thought, but it's not working all the time.
Well, let's say you should have sent 23 and you send 20, and then one of the missing 3 comes they want to do something in a few years. I think they have I think there's an issue there. If I was a lawyer representing them, I'd be like, hey, you told these other 20 people, you didn't tell us.
Yeah.
They all have to go to a town vote anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty publicly noticed. I mean, I think that's an interesting idea, and we'd have to ask an actual practicing lawyer, but it sets off alarm bells in my head right away.
I don't think it's really doable, but the point more that I got from that was that they're just common folk in town who somehow missed those changes. So maybe it needs to be advertised more, or maybe it needs to be promoted. I don't know. Somehow they missed those changes. They were very upset about it.
I don't know what. I'm not trying to defend the planning commission, but I'm not sure what else we could have done. We put up like written notices in town hall, Jacob's Market, we put it on Front Porch Forum a bunch of times.
I mean, yeah, there's something.
I guess we could.
What,
put
the
it on
last time we changed the bylaws?
Yeah,
2020?
when we were doing the public hearings.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't part of that.
Yeah, I guess we could put it on Facebook or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, to derail you on that.
You gotta get old fashioned, get on the back of the pickup truck with megaphones and just drive through the streets yelling and screaming.
Sounds like something for a community outreach.
There you go,
officer.
yeah.
Set yourself up.
On it.
So Larry, just to, since we're at 6:40 here, so it sounds like we have two, everyone correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like maybe we have two to-dos to get on the agenda. One is the mapping education. And the other one is, I'm just thinking out loud, and sorry, this falls on you, so it's when you could get to it, I think. Everyone could read the stuff you sent, obviously, but it's almost like putting together a proposed process, for lack of a better word. Like, if we wanted to do this, these are the 7 steps, just big picture, 7 steps that we would follow to do it. And then we could talk about it after everyone read everything and figure out if we think there should be an extra step, or if we think, we could eliminate one of the ones Larry put in, or whatever. That feels like the path forward. Does anyone disagree with that? What am I missing?
I agree with that.
Okay.
I would add one, I don't know if it's before or after that. I would like us to go through each of these different steps in here to identify or agree on all those that need, stronger protection versus those that, yes, they need protection, but we can do that maybe with some management guidelines or that kind of thing. So it basically goes through, do we agree with the outline here of primary and secondary tier ecological priorities, or do we want to shift that somehow?
Do you think that's like basically step 1, Larry?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And, one of the things that I really liked about this slide deck presentation is that on each page that looks at a specific resource,
We have it already.
Sorry, everyone.
they identified what's already in the zoning rules that is there to protect the resource, if anything, and then where there is no protection. For example, connectivity is not specifically protected now, but wetlands are. Streams and stream buffers are protected in the zoning rules now. So, it's helpful to sort of start with what we already have in place when you're trying to think about what else do we need to do, and maybe, just check off the things that we already have protections in place. Maybe identify, are they strong enough? Do we think that they're good enough to protect the resource in the ways that they should be protected? If not, why not? How could they be stronger? And where we have no protections in place in the zoning rules, as Sandy suggested, let's talk about, do we have some agreement in this group about whether this is something we should move to protect? And if so, what kind of protection would be appropriate? Because that I think will serve as a guide for developing drafts going forward for what should change.
So I have a question for you, Larry. Sorry. So it sounds like for the next meetings, like the next few meetings, we have this stuff that we just talked about. And then you and I had also talked about bundling up this work we've already done. Everyone's familiar with it. ADUs, mountain bikes, event, wedding venues, blah, blah, blah. So it sounds like those are the 2 big things maybe for the foreseeable future. Do you agree?
Yeah, just as an FYI, personally, I am going to be out of town from March 11th through the 19th. So I will not be here for the scheduled second March meeting, I think. No, that's not right. I will be here, but I'll be away during the prep time.
Well, you'll be here for the meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm here for March 6th, and then I leave a few days later, and I'm away for 9 days.
Okay. And when are you back? When are you back?
On the 19th, and then our next meeting will be the 20th. Yeah. So
I mean, here's a question: should we skip that meeting?
I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I'm just telling you that ability to prep a lot of stuff for that second meeting in March is going to be limited.
So I think we should probably skip the March 20th
We
meeting
could do
unless
the
you want to do the map.
mapping
You want to do the mapping?
Yeah.
You and community outreach.
Yeah.
officer, Okay. So March 20th, we'll do mapping.
Do you want to email
All right.
me the links to the ones that you?
Sure.
I'll bring my compass.
Yeah, do we need the compass, Jeff?
No.
Does Roy need to bring his compass?
I mean,
Roy,
if we
don't
want
need your
to-
compass.
Yeah. We're not gonna put the like monitor on the table and like move it for you to get to north, so.
That's an awesome idea. Thank you, Sandy.
And just to give Penny kudos, she's the one that went through all of our zoning regs and figured out where our protections are
Yeah.
and where they are not. So thank you, Penny.
And
Nice.
Jens isn't quite accurate on some of them because we didn't have it prepared for him at the moment, so that's another
Yeah.
issue.
Thank you.
As we go through them, we'll decide.
Yeah.
So do we think that it would be ripe in terms of one of these other to-dos to have the conversation that Sandy just suggested at our next meeting, like just to go through and just sort of
Yeah.
prioritize among ourselves,
Yeah.
which we think are the most critical resources to focus on for protection before anything gets written down?
Sounds like the right place to
Yeah.
start.
Yeah.
Should we set aside 45 minutes for that? Have the meeting? Feels great? No? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, do
Yeah.
that, we'll get as far as we can.
Yeah. So that'll be the next meeting.
Next meeting.
Yeah. And meanwhile, I can work on this outline of how we would do it, what the process would be.
And if everyone could read the stuff Larry sent around before the next meeting, because that might sort of just inform.
Yeah, I think you'll find that this is helpful. So these two pieces, there's one called overlay districts, which goes right to the point of what an overlay district is and how it works. And then this is a more general sort of template or toolbox of different options that towns have used to protect natural resources. And overlay districts is one of those tools, but there are others that I mentioned in here, such as development review standards, resource protection districts, like specific to forest habitat, wildlife, et cetera, fixed area and sliding scale zoning. I mean, there's really a lot of different techniques that can be used. I personally feel like the overlay districts is a little more straightforward because you don't have to change everything. You just focus on the things that you want to protect, and you identify the additional sort of regulatory steps that have to be followed when there are projects proposed in and nearby those resources. But there, we might not choose to follow Jericho's lead, which is one of the other handouts. So this piece is just scanned right out of Jericho's zoning bylaws, and it's the new section 6.7 Natural Resource Overlay District. So this describes the new rules that Jericho is following when they're considering a project if that's within that overlay district. So I think
It's not easy reading.
no. Well, and that's part of the challenge, it's like, I'm going to give you an outline that'll be broad brush, but a lot of the drafting is very technical and, nitty gritty down in the weeds because, as Jericho did, you have to sort of define what it is you're trying to protect. You have to describe the process.
Yeah.
In some cases, you might be requiring an applicant to hire specialists like Arrowwood to come in and do a specific assessment, of, for example, a wildlife connector, like how many deer and beaver and bobcats are crossing in a particular spot that you want to propose for stricter protection, to document that. And like there's towns are allowed to charge applicants for the cost of hiring experts, but it doesn't necessarily go over easy with all applicants when the planning or the DRB says to an applicant, oh, gee, by the way, you got to spend $1,000 and hire this expert.
Or $5,000.
Right. So, but yeah, it's complicated, but I think it's good to understand the lay of the land. And I think the handouts I sent you would be, a good way to get that overview and then look at Jericho's specific rules and think about, is that an approach that we think would work in Underhill? Because if we do, then, we can start to down that road. It'll take us a while to get there.
Okay. So we all have our homework for next meeting on this. Read the attachments Larry sent and think about just your thoughts on this. Okay. I think that takes us to Sawmills, which I will turn over to you, Larry. And I have to return that call for work super fast. I'll be back in like 2 minutes. I apologize, but please, obviously don't wait for me.
There, did I make a copy of the Sawmill?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
It's in the meeting packet, which is to say, if you open the town calendar and go to tonight's meeting and double click on it, you'll see it, but I'll give you.
I'll just do a hard copy.
Okay, that's fine. So, and I'll try to bring it up on the screen to see how that goes. Maybe I can, maybe I can't.
I got a question about the Sawmill. I wasn't here for that meeting, but it seems that with previous meetings, we were talking about referring to this as wood processing.
That's fair.
And we had decided, I thought, that the sawmill, it's not a sawmill, the firewood processing. So, I mean.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's everybody else think about that? I think it's just.
Yeah, I think thought we were separated on making it a special use or conditional use situation or use.
if they're treated the same, we could
Yeah.
just say and.
And, okay, because it's just confusing because somebody might look at that. So
Yeah, I guess it's a
basically
tricky
what.
thing.
What you decided last time, which I agree with, is that it's a conditional use
Mhm.
in every district in town, except for the village districts.
Yes.
It's not in.
That's consistent with what I've drafted here. So two things. So one is that there is a definitional issue. There's one sentence in our definition of sawmills at the end of the land use regs, which is problematic. It's got to go.
Yeah, right.
And I try to explain why it's got to go, because I feel like it was put there with the best of intentions, because Vermont has strict protections for sort of traditional forestry activities when people earn their living by cutting trees down and milling them on site. That's appropriate and it's a protected activity. The distinction, which is very important, which our definition loses track of, is that when you have a wood processing operation, to use your term, which is not happening on the site where trees are being taken
Right.
down,
Yeah.
where they're cutting trees that were taken down somewhere else and brought to the site to be cut in the portable sawmill, it is not protected under state statute. So towns, because it's not protected under state statute, towns can and do regulate that. And so, and then the question, sort of take a step back from that and say the definition should be plain and easily understood by anybody without having to have a technical background in land use law. And part of that is saying that it kind of doesn't matter whether it's a full-fledged sawmill like Lamell Lumber in Essex or a portable operation like the one that's been controversial here, if the local impacts of it, if the neighborhood impacts of it are similar, which is to say consistent noise over a long period of time, trucks coming and going, materials being stored on site. And I think you're right to your second point that I think we did discuss, and in this proposal here, the very first thing is to change the conditional use criteria for any sawmill operation. Because right now, it's a conditional use that can only be evaluated in the rural residential district, which is among our higher density residential districts. I mean, it's any sawmill operation.
On Route 15 only, though.
Yeah.
Right.
So any sawmill operation at any scale, almost invariably, if it's in the rural residential district close to Route 15, the noise is gonna bother people because there's gonna be houses nearby.
Right.
Whereas, we have 3 conservation districts in town, which are much more much more sparsely settled, and where forestry type of operations, sawmills, among other things, or cutting trees down, are a traditional use. And so what I propose here, and this might not be the right level of regulation, but I've said, let's take it right off the table for the rural residential district as a possible use. And let's say that it is a conditional use in the water conservation, the Mount Mansfield scenic preservations, and the soil and water conservation districts. Because, in all three cases, we have large areas of land there, large lots. And obviously, as we discussed, the further away a sawmill is from the nearest residence, the less likely there are to be perceived problems, conflicts with neighbors. So, and because we're saying that this should be considered as a conditional use in any of those areas of town, it would have to come before the Development Review Board for review. Neighbors would have, there would be a public hearing, neighbors would have a written notification, they would have the opportunity to provide feedback before it's allowed to start up. The DRB would have to grant conditional use approval. And the DRB has the option to not grant conditional use review if they feel like it's not situated in a place that will be conducive to sort of neighborhood life.
We're talking about removing it from the rural residential, but also the village center districts.
Well, we have the table at the beginning of our land use regs that says what is permitted use, what is a conditional use, and what is not allowed in all the districts. And so sawmills is a listed use, and it's already not allowed in any district but rural residential.
Right.
So if we make it only a conditional use in those three conservation districts, and then make it not allowed in any of the other districts, including the village districts and rural residential, then that would accomplish the change that we're seeking. And I think it's a really important piece that any proposal has to get a permit, because I know there was a lot of controversy with the, what's it called, the one that was so hotly debated.
I think you should it should be included in the rural residential district too, because I live in the rural residential district, and I can think of probably 3 spots along my road where people have, like 250 acres.
Yes.
Where it would be an appropriate spot for a business like that. So I don't know how everybody else feels, but like on Hooper Hill Road, Sandy, can you think of, is that rural residential?
Close to the road it is, but
Yeah, right.
I think
If you go farther in, like down to where the Davises live or whatever, it would be an appropriate place for a business like that, which would, but that's the soil and conservation.
Soil and water
Is that what
conservation.
you
So just that, Roy, some rural and residential haven't been built up yet, but they are 3 acre. So it's that you could have a house every 3 acres.
Yeah, but this won't be, because it's, there's a sheep farm and then a big sugar bush, if it's in current use, can it be eventually subdivided if it's in the rural residential?
Oh yeah, current use is a temporary status.
But I think that
They pay a penalty.
Oh, of course.
that the two, like Nikita, where Nikita lives, right on Irish Settlement Road, he owns like 250 acres. I don't think he can develop any of it. So it's in the rural residential district, but it's not developable, right?
Well, can you say that, like?
So
Can
look
you-
at this map though. I think what you're gonna find is that if you're far enough from the road, you are in the soil and water
Right,
conservation.
okay, so a lot of his land is in
Yeah,
that,
I was
okay.
gonna say, if you said rural residential with the stipulation is like 100 acres plus non partitionable or something like that. I don't know if that gets too.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about lots in the rural residential district that are deep enough, I mean, right now there's a restriction that sawmills have to be within a certain distance from the road.
Right.
So, that's where I thought, well, that's a problem because most of the houses are right along the road.
Yeah.
So the possibility of conflicts are pretty significant in most of the district. But there are some deep lots where, a sawmill operation could be far enough that it wouldn't be a problem. But I think that's sort of a gray area. There may only be maybe 5 parcels in the rural residential district that's true for. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud here, and
Yeah.
actually on my road, there's quite a few, but.
Yeah.
I would like to say that the water district doesn't seem like an appropriate place. If you look at that map there, I mean, it includes Underhill Center even,
Yeah.
So I don't know. are you thinking that it's just the edges of that district or something?
Well, again, because these kind of projects would be subject to conditional use review and approval, if somebody proposed a new sawmill operation or wood processing operation that was close to Underhill Center Village, it would go before the DRB and neighbors would have the chance to speak about it. But, I think part of it is that we also talked about like a radius around a proposed sawmill. And we could make that, if we took the next step, which is anticipated at the end of my draft, took the next step and said, let's, beyond just enforcing performance standards for noise and making it subject to conditional use, if we took the next step and said, let's make a short subchapter within chapter 4 that specifically describes what to watch out for and what to regulate within sawmill applications, then you could say stuff like that. You could say, there needs to be a minimum distance of, just pick a number, 500 feet from the nearest residence. And that would be part of the criteria that the DRB would apply when they're considering an application for a new wood processing operation.
I got a question for Penny. When people come in for a conditional use permit, no matter what it is, and then the neighbors come in and they really are against it, does that weigh pretty heavily on your decision?
It sort of depends, but for the most part, if it can fall within the regulations, we generally feel like it should be permitted.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to just accept that if neighbors complain, you shouldn't be able to do with your land what you want to do with your land.
Right.
But
the one that started this whole conversation on Gordon Williams is out.
It wasn't just because the neighbors complained that a violation had occurred. And when we looked at it, looking at the definitions, we ended up deciding it was not exempt, so it had to get a permit.
Yeah, but
it wasn't allowed in that zoning district, so that was sort of black and white then. If it was a matter of, yes, he could have been given a permit and the neighbors didn't like it, well, it would have been a little bit harder emotionally to deal with. But
yeah, right.
I think we probably would have still given the permit.
But he could have applied for the permit as a home occupation.
He did.
And did he? Or?
He did, yes, as a home industry.
Oh, okay.
But
So it wasn't a sawmill, though.
But it was still, we felt it was still the same point that it was a sawmill, it's a home industry, so it wasn't permitted in that.
Yeah, I see.
In that district. Yeah.
Got it.
I have a similar thing. I'm just on the theme of Penny being here, which is my understanding, and Penny can tell me if I'm understanding this incorrectly. But my understanding, and the only thing that I've been torn on, Barry, because obviously we spoke about this, is I felt like what Charlie told me and what Brad told me was, I'm super paraphrasing here, but like, don't just make it a conditional use for the DRB. You should give them 2 or 3 rules. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for.
That'll weed some people out.
Yeah, or just sets, I don't know if weeds people out. Yeah, we're saying the same thing, but it was more like, don't just dump it in, I'm being a little cute here, but don't just dump it in my lap at the DRB with like 0 guidance. Give me something that says 2 or 3 hard rules. Like you can't, I'm going to pick something ridiculous that no one would disagree with. It can't be within 5 feet of a nursery, right? Like there's obvious things you could pick that no one would disagree with, right? But I felt like they were saying, give me 2 or 3 hard rules and then make it a conditional use, but like it can't be within 100 feet of this.
It's helpful.
Or like
it's helpful if it's harder rules. For instance, one of the other things that we're talking about with natural resources, it's minimize disturbance on a steep slope. What is minimize disturbance? And then we've got to try and figure out what that means. And that's where the neighbors come in. So if we're permitting something new, and all the neighbors come and say, there's going to be a whole lot of noise with this. The noise carries down this valley like crazy. You wouldn't believe it. I don't even think it should be there. Well, it can be there. It's permitted to be there. So we have to say, okay, you're permitted to be there. but you can't open the windows. Something like that to try and please the neighbors. So we might throw in a condition that says, you can't open the windows, so you have to keep the noise within the building. But yes, you can be here. There's nothing that says you can't be here, but the neighbors are against noise. So that's where the neighbors might play a part. But when it's something more vague, like minimize disturbance or do the best you can on this, it then falls back to the DRB to make these hard ethical questions, But sometimes it's hard to think through all the repercussions of what also the regulations, like not within 500 feet. Well, maybe there are no houses within 500 feet right now, but what if the neighbor wants to subdivide and then there will be a house within 500 feet? Does that mean that closes that down, or it's grandfathered, but somehow it's also not following the regulation anymore? It's a sawmill within 500 feet, or what if there's, somebody that affects now somebody across the road? Should you be now regulating what subdivision can happen across the road because of, so that's all.
Well, that's the balance, right? But I feel like, and I saw when the screen was up, otherwise I saw Gordon was on there, but, like, I feel like, and I don't want to speak for Gordon, but I feel like if I was trying to do something, it's like finding that balance, right? So like someone is like, I want to do this on my land, or I'm thinking about doing this on my land, and you at least have enough information, what's written down, to know like, yeah, I have a good shot at this, or like, no, this is a total waste of my time, so you don't waste your time on it, versus coming in for a conditional use, and you're like, I don't know, right? It feels like if there were like 2 or 3, I'm making up a number here, I know, but just like guidelines of any sort where, like, if I wanted to start a sawmill operation and I was like, oh yeah, that'd never work on my land, like it doesn't fit at all. Whereas maybe Gordon could look at his and be like, oh yeah, my parcel's big enough, like I could do it. Let me dig into it further. Whereas if it's just totally a conditional use, I feel like you get no guidance on the way in as to whether it's suitable for you at all.
The DRB doesn't have any choice but to follow the rules as they are, right?
Right.
And we're talking about changing the rules.
And we have a lot of conditional use, and the reason is we have no industrial area or commercial area in town.
Right.
So anytime you want to put anything that makes money anywhere in town, it has to be conditional use, because we can't say, yes, put this section, whatever you want to do in this. It's all in the residential section, so it makes it very challenging.
Right. Other towns that have regulated sawmills do have industrial zones, and that's where they tend to push those kinds of operations, because that it's an industrial type of operation, right? It's a noise and materials coming and going, and it is something that's more typically associated with an industrial type of use. But we don't have an industrial zone, so as Penny says, we have to think about when we're looking at our conditional use tables, what kinds of things would be of concern to neighbors, and therefore we want to have a process where neighbors have a say, and that's what the conditional use review is. And we owe it to the DRB, frankly, to give them clear standards to follow, because as Brian pointed out, it's kind of a lose-lose proposition if we're saying that you get to regulate this, but we're not going to tell you what the underlying rules or standards should be.
I can't tell you how many times we said on the DRB, what was the planning commission thinking? What was their thought process behind
Well, that's why it gave us that whole list of stuff, and you're like, hey, could you guys help clarify this, which isn't some of the stuff Larry's been putting together. So yeah, anyways.
So I can work on, for me as a next step, I can work on drafting a short subchapter in chapter 4 that lays out some standards, drawing from the discussions you've already had here.
I don't think just like basic, right? But like something, right?
It would address setbacks. It would address, the thing is, what I was trying to point out earlier in this document higher up is that, we already have the ability, we have performance standards. We have an ordinance about enforcing performance standards. Our zoning administrator already has the authority to write tickets if he feels that someone's a landowner is in violation of those standards for noise or for anything else. And those are just like a parking ticket or a moving violation ticket. You can contest it in municipal court down in White River Junction, but a lot of people would just rather acknowledge, I screwed up and here's $150 or whatever the fine is. And then you're part of a conversation about how are you going to avoid doing this again or any more than what triggered this ticket. So, we already have the mechanism in place for the town to go after people that we think are being irresponsible in their behaviors and impact on their neighbors for whatever reason, It could be vibration, it could be smoke, it could be noise, any number of different things that are spelled out in the section 3.14 of the ordinance right now. But, there is, I think, also a challenge for any small town about doing what I was just describing, because, in all instances, I think, unless somebody's just absolutely doing horrible things like dumping toxic waste into the Browns River indiscriminately, I think in most cases, the town wants to take a softer approach than writing somebody a ticket right off the bat. So, they have this, usually the zoning administrator will follow a protocol where they start with first confirming that there's a problem and what the nature of the problem is, and documenting with pictures and decibel readings if it's a noise issue, and then we'll write a warning letter and send it certified mail to the property owner. This is what I observed. This is a violation of section 3.14 of our land use regs, and it's a problem for the neighbors, and you need to stop it, or you need to have a conversation about modifying what you're doing so this is not going to happen anymore. If the landowner doesn't respond within 7 days, then go out and write a ticket and begin a more formal enforcement actions. But it can be difficult to get those moves enforced. In Charlotte, they didn't have that enforcement authority. And so in order to get a landowner to comply with a notice of violation issue, you'd have to take them to Superior Court, get the court to rule and agree with the town that a violation has occurred, and then you'd have to go and get a separate enforcement order to be served by a sheriff's deputy. And if the person still didn't respond, then you'd have to ask yourself how many thousands of dollars in legal fees and the town's resources are we willing to expend to try to fix this problem. Whereas here you do have the zoning administrator has that authority right off the bat.
What happens if they don't pay the ticket?
Well, that's, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you give them another ticket and they
don't
ignore
pay
it forever.
Yeah. Then the town has to decide how much it's willing to play hardball with that property.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it gets expensive and sticky.
Are you thinking about bringing some rules for it?
No comment. I'll tell you off the record.
I know, I hate pushing snow across the road.
Yeah, right.
I saw that from
I just blow it into the road.
So what is if you're gonna add a few things in that subsection, Larry, is the plan? Sorry, because I apologize. I had to take that call. Is the plan to add that and try to finalize these at the next meeting? Did people have thoughts on the rest of this?
Well, I was interested in hearing the group's feedback about each of these elements.
Okay.
So, do people agree with the definitional change? Do people agree with conditional use standards being applied and review being applied to sawmills in districts where we think they're appropriate? Do we think the districts I suggested where it could be appropriate are the right districts to call out in the land use regs? And then, just sort of taking note of the performance standards issue. This is something we could do if we had to. And then looking at actually drafting some specific language for Chapter 4 that describes sawmills as a distinct use and what the standards would be for the DRB to apply in a conditional use review. So it's kind of the three main pieces. Do people think that this is all a sound idea?
But yeah, I think if you're gonna do this, then update this table
Yes.
according to what you said, and then maybe in your subsection, as you define conditions, you kind of categorize it like rural residential, and then some bullet points. Minimum setback, minimum lot acreage, blah, blah, blah. Water conservation section, minimum setback from, edge of stream or whatever, things like that, and literally itemize it per those districts that we're gonna conditional use it. So then DRB can, if something pops up in that district, they can literally just go to that section, like, all right, we can start with these three things in Mount Mansfield Scenic Preservation.
Yeah.
The only thing that I have any hesitation about is the allowed noise levels. I don't really know what the level of noise associated with a sawmill, and I don't know if what we've got in our regs is realistic for it or not. And then we have the issue of people saying, where is the noise? If we measure it, where can we take it from? Do we take it from the edge of our property, the edge of his property, the edge of the building, So that has created some issues for us in the past, mostly relative to the wedding fund.
So it sounds like we need to be very clear on where that measurement is taken from.
And is that the correct measurement? I don't know. Is that the correct decibel level in our regs? I don't know if it has
Right.
any relationship at all to a sawmill.
But there already is a noise standard in the nuisance ordinance and also in our land use regs. And it is, I mean, to my reading, it sounds a little on the low side in terms of the volume of noise, and there are other considerations. I'm not.
You mean the volume being too quiet?
It's
You should
60
allow
decibels, 60 decibels measured at the property line. So, I mean, 70 decibels is kind of a ballpark, or 70, 72 decibels is the ballpark of if your neighbor who lives 50 yards away is mowing his lawn with a push mower, a gas push mower, that's about what you would expect a year. So 60 feels low to me as a standard to try to pursue enforcement of a noise ordinance, but who am I to say? I think there's probably reasons why the town adopted that number, and there may be other fine points about that. But the point is that if any noise above 85 or 90 decibels can be painful to people with sensitive hearing. 60 decibels is on the low side, but who's to say what's annoying enough to push the town to enforce a standard? And as I said, it can be problematic, especially if someone gets tickets written and then it just ignores them.
How did the performance, I should know this, but I'm not looking at them. How did the performance standard and the nuisance reg relate to each other? The nuisance reg just also has hertz, is that right?
Yes.
But other than that, the levels are the same?
Just open up the regs here. Just read you what they say. I think the 60 decibel figure is in the nuisance ordinance.
Hey, Brian, real quick, can I just give you a quick example of while he's looking that up? My processor at 100 feet, it measures 70 decibels if you need like a distance. So with 70
decibels. Okay.
So at 100 feet, it reads about 70 decibels in an open field. So just for reference, with nothing around it. So 100 feet, it's reading 70 decibels with two identical decibel meters that the town has purchased.
Okay.
So for reference, if that helps, I just wanted to throw that out there to you guys, just to kind of piggyback off what Penny said. So
Right.
Thank you.
To default to what we've got may not even be a realistic number. To just go through all of this and say, and it can't be more than.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, the performance standards for noise specify any noise in excess of 60 decibels that is not the result of occasional customary activities associated with an allowed use, for example, lawn mowing in a residential zone.
And the nuisance ordinance also says 60 decibels?
I'm not familiar with that.
I don't have,
I thought this was our nuisance ordinance.
No, there's two. There's a performance standard in the regs, and then there's a separate nuisance ordinance that refers to like a bunch of stuff. The only one of which is relevant in this situation is the noise. There's other stuff you can't do as well that I can't remember, but noise is the only bit that applies to this.
Depends on the hour of the day.
Oh, that's right. You have it, Sandy.
Yeah.
Oh, and it has hertz too. Yeah. Yeah, it's a totally different chart, Larry.
Yeah.
So it's like, which one do we want to refer to, right?
Right. Yeah,
It's
so.
also weird that we
Or
have
does
two
Does it
different.
need to change, is what I was suggesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also weird that the town has two different standards, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah, because there's the hertz rating of the noise, essentially where it is on the noise spectrum, and then there's the sound pressure in decibels. So typically, noise measurement through a decibel meter is using measuring only the sound pressure in decibels.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that this scale starts at 72 and 67, and it goes down from there. So the higher pitched the noise is, the lower level it's considered annoying. So
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, because I know like this range here, I know 300 to 600 is in that if you're gonna listen to meditation stuff, you're usually in that 300 to 400 hertz
Yeah.
range. So,
Huh.
So Larry said something about in the regs, an allowed use. Well, a condition of use is never an allowed use, for instance, so it would never, I can't remember what Larry said, but it's acceptable to be more than that if it's an allowed use for a certain amount of time, but.
Yes.
yeah, I think the time is probably a sensitive issue with any kind of noise, right? Like, I mean, yeah, if somebody's just running their lawnmower for an hour, like you anticipate, oh, this is gonna be done soon, right? But when you know it's more of an industrial sound, you're like, I know this is gonna go 8 to 5, and you're already kind of like elevated to an irritation level before it even, right? The first time you hear it, you're like, right? Whereas if it's just a lawnmower, equal decibel, you're like, oh, he'll be done in an hour.
Because so it's less the time of day and more the duration.
And the quality of the sound, if it's a dog barking or a kid screaming or just music playing, you know, it's just the quality of that sound too over that time.
Sure.
Well, I know that Charlie, I know I've said this before, but I know what Charlie and Brad had specifically mentioned to me, and I know Gordon talked about it in one of when he spoke to us, was like, it was like a setback and time of day were the two big ones that come up, right? Like, obviously, I don't know that anyone had spoken about duration. That's different, but you know, obviously, no one's asking to do their sawmill at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, right? Like, no one thinks that's
well, but it is a valid consideration to include if you're writing standards. And you know, by the way, you know, as I pointed out in the conditional use section of my draft, that when the DRB is doing a conditional use review, they can set standards, or sorry, they can set conditions of approval. So they can limit hours of operation, days of the week, they can limit times of the day, and you know, other sort of common sense considerations that would be of concern to neighbors. And neighbors are going to be different, right? You know, like you used to be able to assume when everybody went off to work at 8 o'clock and came back at 5 o'clock, that you know, it would be less, whatever noise you were making or smoke you were producing or vibration, whatever, would be less annoying to people between 8 and 5. But people work from home now, you know.
Well, that's been one of the big issues.
Exactly.
This one in particular. Yeah.
So, you know, you can't, when you write standards like this, you have to think of kind of the least common denominator, like what is going to affect people regardless of what their hours of work are or their workplace, whether they're away from home during the day or at night. You know, people working night shift would have different concerns than someone working a traditional 9 to 5 type of job. Yeah. So you have to take all that into account. And you know, with clear standards, I think the DRB would be in a better position to make good decisions. So it's not just one neighbor complaining that brings the whole process to a halt.
Would it be possible for you, I keep asking you stuff, Larry, but would it be possible for you to, because we've looked at this stuff before, but at least I in particular, I have a very hard time putting like the hertz and the decibels together just in my head. But I'm wondering, would it be possible for you to come up with like a suggestion? Like, I think the performance standards do make sense, like we should stick with those, or I don't think they make sense, and here's 3 reasons why.
Sure.
Okay.
Listen, he has 2 pages of notes just from Brian. I think you're maxed out.
I'm trying to fill up 2025, Jeff. You know,
use up your 15 hours for this
That's
week.
right.
Sorry.
Yeah. This isn't all for the next 2 days. Yeah, this is like months
You've
worth
gotten
of.
2 so far, so I think you're
Have you been keeping it to 15 hours?
I did last week. It's almost exactly 15. Most weeks I've been under that limit. But, you know, part of it is because I'm still ramping up here. So as I get more fully ramped up and my list of projects that Brian.
It wasn't a hard limit. It was a suggestion, right?
Yes,
It was a suggestion. We could always get an override from Brad. Whether Larry wants the override is a separate issue.
Well, and I really liked the way that Sandy talked about, you know, in the beginning of the meeting on the first topic, is that why reinvent the wheel, right? So, you know, usually when I'm researching, drafting new regulations, I'm not starting from scratch. I ask myself, like, what towns do I know have sawmills? And then you're like, oh, Bristol has a big sawmill, Essex has a sawmill. So, and I think Morristown was the other example I pulled. So I'll go and look at their zoning regs that are online and look what kind of language they use, and then take my cues from that. A lot of times I'll just cut and paste, That's, imitation is the best form of flattery, right? So, and it's, of course, it's all public domain stuff, so it's okay to do. Maybe not if you're a musician or a playwright, but it is in the field of planning, so.
So I have a question for you, Larry, since it's almost 25 after. So I know you did work on some of the stuff we've done in the past too. Like, so for next meeting, what would you want to be on the agenda from a work perspective? So Jeff doesn't criticize me anymore. I'm very sensitive.
So I haven't really had a chance to dig into a lot of that past work that,
So maybe we should wait on that.
I would wait,
Okay.
just because I want to, when I come to you with a plan, I want it to be based on what I understand about it. I may have questions about some of the things you passed, or realize that there's some gaps that need to be filled in. So I want to do it right. I want to be thorough. That's how I roll. So
thank you. So it sounds like maybe next meeting we should be thinking about reviewing the ends document, which doesn't put too much on your plate, process, and Sawmill follow-up with the standards you were going to look at. Does that sound like a decent agenda to everyone? Okay.
I really liked your write-up on sawmills. It made it very clear.
yeah,
That was good.
It's almost like it's helpful when you have someone who's focused on this as their job. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Crazy.
And future iterations they're going to get a little more specific and technical. But then what I do to get ready to present it to the public for a public hearing is I will have kind of a stripped down version of the exact language that's being proposed. And that'll be what goes to public hearing, but then I'll have a guidance document that goes with that, which will set forth for every change that's proposed. We'll set forth what's the purpose of the change, what are we trying to accomplish, what's the rationale for doing this, why do we need to change this in the rules that we have now, and what would be the effect of it if it's passed. And that kind of a chart is really helpful in sort of not only to members of the commission, but then to members of the public, sort of explaining why we do this. And that would get posted on the website in addition to the draft, well in advance of the public hearing. And then, some of the, public outreach and engagement that was talked about earlier in terms of, write something for the Front Porch Forum, write an article for the local newspaper, for the Mountain Gazette or whatever, maybe have an informational meeting or two before you have a public hearing and invite people, in an informal setting to come and learn about it. I mean, there's various things that you can do that will help people get it, because you want people to get it. What you don't want is for people to feel like they've been shanghaied by a proposal. Because, there are a lot of people in town for a variety of reasons. No matter how much you publicize a public hearing, they will not notice it and they will not come. So, you have to think like who beyond the usual suspects needs to know about this, and how do we bring it to them in a way that they'll get it. One thing that we did in Charlotte and in Bolton was we actually created a panel discussion, which we then had, in that case, it was different community access outfit than the one they use here, not Mansfield Community TV, but we did a panel discussion with several members of the Planning Commission, maybe in this case the DRB, and we had them talk about what the proposal is and explain it in common sense language, plain English language, and then Mount Mansfield Community TV, in this case, would be they would make it available on their website that covers Town of Underhill proceedings, and we would promote it through Front Porch Forum. So we'd give people a link to that recording on their website and encourage people to go and look at it if they want to know more.
Good.
And not everyone will, but it was a great way that people who wouldn't come to a public meeting could find out about something in enough depth that they could really understand it.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Great idea.
Anything else?
Not on this.
Okay. Well,
do the minutes?
is it 7:28? Yep, that clock is on.
So we
Do
want
you
to
want
do the
to
minutes?
vote on?
Yep, I cannot vote. Wait, was I here? Yeah, I was at the last one.
Yeah.
I can vote on this.
Yeah.
Done 2 meetings back in my head. Yeah. Did anyone have any questions or comments on the minutes?
No.
Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Bart. Is there a second? Sandy, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. It's unanimous. Yeah. Okay, I think that finishes up the agenda, right?
So, yeah.
Does anyone want to, David's not here sadly to make our motion to adjourn. Does anyone want to fill David's shoes and make a motion to adjourn? Tim, step it up. Is there a second? Roy, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Cool.